Hi, listener. This is From Ideology to Unity, spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. Today, I'm continuing a reading of the Red Book of C.G. Jung, A Journey into Unknown Depths by Walter Burchat. So, this is published by Routledge in London and New York, and 2014. No, originally published in 2014 in Brazil by Vozes Publishing House. And it also says first published in 2017 by Carnegie Books. There you go. Enough of the information. I'm going to get to it. So this is chapter 7, The Legacy of the Dead. These figures are the dead, not just your dead. That is, all the images of the shapes you took in the past, which your ongoing life has left behind, but also the throwing dead of human history, the ghostly procession of the past, which is an ocean compared to the drops of your own lifespan. Liber secundus, nox secunda. Immortal mortals, mortal immortals, one living the other's death, and dying the other's life. Heraclitus of Ephesus, The Obscure, Fragment 2, Bornheim, 2002. I will say that the second quote especially seems like reincarnation and the nature of reality in that sense. Living others' death, dying others' life. Mysterious. I can't unravel that entirely, and that's fine. So, and the first one also implies reincarnation to me anyway, but also the collective unconscious. So the past and past lives are manifesting in the present and the collective unconscious. Anyway, we'll see what is said. The dead appear in a range of forms at various moments in the Red Book, always as part of an imaginary dialogue with Jung. In one example, the soul of a woman is anxiously seeking a talisman that will answer her questions. She reminds Jung of one of his former patients who has passed away. There are other examples, such as in intriguing chapter 13 of Liber Secundus, the sacrificial murder, in which Jung discovers a dead child and speaks with its soul, giving him a nearly impossible task to complete. I wonder if he actually did speak to a soul, unknown to him. But I don't know. Another important confrontation with the dead takes place in chapter 15 of Liber Secundus, Nox Secunda, discussed in chapter 5. After the librarian gives him the Imitation of Christ by the Benedictine monk Thomas à Kempis, Jung waits in the anteroom of the library. He hears the sound of voices and shadowy figures pass by. One of these looks at him with tired eyes. This man reveals his name, Ezekiel, declaring that he is Anabaptist. Leaving together with the throngs around him to seek truths and revelations in Jerusalem. Jung shows an interest in following him to seek these truths, but Ezekiel responds that he cannot, as he still has a body. He then declares, "We are the dead." Page 294. So interestingly, if we were to take this literally as actually having occurred, well, it's simply that spirits and ghosts, well, they're different things. A soul that's visiting Earth or whatever, like, it could be that. Yeah, I wasn't where I was going with that wasn't didn't seem like a good way to go after all. Of all the apparitions and interferences of the dead in the Red Book, the most important takes place in the third part, scrutinies, when Philemon gives the second sermon. Wow. The seven sermons to the dead, septem sermons ad mortuis. The hordes of the dead coming from Jerusalem did not find what they were seeking, as though they were indoctrinated by Philemon on the nature of God, man, and destiny. The hordes of the dead appeared during Jung's confrontation with the unconscious through a series of psychological phenomena that took place at his house, 1963, page 182. This chapter discusses the possible reasons for this intense presence of the dead in the Red Book and the role that these had in the life and works of Jung. Ancestor worship and the origins of religion. The dead have always been surrounded by extremely rigorous taboos and rituals. The purpose of these rituals was to separate the realm of the living from the realm of the dead through effective symbols. Propitiatory rituals still exist in contemporary culture through a range of ceremonies, such as the Mass of the Seventh Day in Catholicism and Matziva in Judaism. Judaism also has a traditional custom of covering mirrors for a certain time in order to stop the dead from staying attached to their image and remaining among the living. There are many rituals associated with the cult of the dead that are specific to communities in Brazil. In Santa Rosa, the various small communities in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, and Paraná, there is an unusual ritual called the covering of the soul. When somebody dies, a piece of their clothing is given to a person considered to be of good character, so that their soul is well dressed when they enter heaven. This is because the clothes of the dead stay with him in the tomb, and he needs some other clothes to get into heaven. I didn't know God was such a prude, but wow, okay. Well, I suppose he would be if you're going by the, Catholicism. The person that uses these clothes becomes close to the family and also representative of deceased. In the case of children, they become a godson of the family. Since the beginnings of civilization, the fear of the dead returning, known as revenants, meaning those who return, has been the basis for a wide range of propitiatory rituals. In anthropology and religious studies, these rituals are considered to be the origin of religion itself. And the belief in life after death has existed since early periods of cultural existence. See also Eliade, 1983. The first rituals can be seen on Neanderthal tombs, in which the dead were buried in the fetal position to enable their rebirth into another life. So Neanderthals believed in reincarnation. Interesting. Animal sacrifices in these tombs also seem to indicate that religion and mythology came about as a result of a cult of the dead, Armstrong, 2005. If these rituals ward off the fear of invasion by unknown spirits, they also reveal veneration and religious respect, and the notion that the dead are of value and protect the living. In ancient Greece, ancestor worship was the origin of the hero cult. The protecting hero actually being a deified person from the past who had died and become an entity that protected the city. See also Brandau, 1987, which may well be what was the case with Hercules. The dead are an important possible symbolic interpretations of the dead. The dead are an important key to the understanding of Liber Novus, and perhaps one of the most important. There is a prevailing idea that they need to be saved and that something must be done to integrate this energy within the collective unconscious that manifests in the form of those who have died. The number of the unredeemed dead has become greater than the number of living Christians. Therefore, it is time that we accept the dead. Page 297. The encounter with a group of the dead, murmuring like a frenzied flapping of wings, is repeated in the third part of the book, Scrutinies, when Philemon gives the enigmatic 7 sermons to the dead. This moment is the climax of Liber Novus. It involves a process of indoctrination and recovery. Ezekiel, the Anabaptist, previously declared that he and the hordes of the dead were going to Jerusalem to visit the most sacred of tombs. And now the dead returning from Jerusalem declare that they did not find what they were seeking. At the beginning of the sermons, an agitated and murmuring throng of the dead approaches Jung. The 7 sermons are proffered to them, and they question Philemon, who in turn responds in Gnostic parables. After each sermon, the dead become either more agitated or calmer, reacting in a different way to each sermon. It seems that the intention of Philemon's speech is to satisfy the dead in their search for knowledge of the mysteries of life, God, man, and his destiny. This really is a profound mystery. What is the meaning of this near omnipresence of the dead in the Red Book? One explanation that has been given for this is that we find ourselves is that we ourselves are the dead who cannot find the answers in established religion and need something new and experiential or Gnostic to attain through gnosis or knowledge. So, well, there's the idea that God is dead, but if we are in pantheism, in a sense, we're God. Our soul, each soul is part of God. So that would translate it to being, instead of God is dead and we have killed him, we are dead and we have killed ourselves. How does that make sense? Well, in a sense, it could be that we're like the walking dead because we're cut off from the spirituality of the past because we're so secular in our current society. And maybe it's through being cut off from religion that we can reattach in a new way, rather than a way that's controlled by elites and established, Romanized, and the religions that are shaped by the elites for the elites' purposes. And Gnosticism is obviously linked with the law of one and spirituality. In a sense, even though it's old, I would say it has a lot of similarities to New Age religions, spirituality. And even Jung was aware of the age of Aquarius and that things are changing. So a vivid new truth consistent with the name Liber Novus that makes sense to our souls and that has not suffered the wear of automatic convention. Well, a lot of these established religions like Catholicism, Islam, etc., like the way it's become just convention, and the way people have followed these religions has been through, well, just automatically following it habitually because it's convention, and they're just doing it because of that, and it kind of feeling lifeless. And in fact, earlier on in this book, what it mentions is that Jung had like a vision that's of like a church and basically, I think, defecating on it, like, or something. And what that demonstrated was that and also it mentions that, like, just generally that Jung felt the sense that his father, when he went through religious rituals and stuff, was just like going through the motions, and it was lifeless. Like there was no real meaning to it. It was just, yeah, going through motions. And that sounds like automatic convention to me. The where of automatic convention. Where is the spirituality? Where is the vitality and dynamism and connection to the divine in religion that's become worn through a sense of automatic convention, that people are just doing rituals just for the sake of it? I knew a quite religious woman when I was studying university, and she was actually a very kind person, but that's not really the point. The point is that she was in a Christian society, the Christian society university, and she was saying a lot of them, they're not really that Christian. Like they're quite like talking behind each other's back and not even following their principles that much. They're just going through the motions. So yeah, a lot of it is, and a lot of this established religion is about shame, fear, and guilt, and it's not really about a real loving connection. You know, it's not really spiritual, and it being spiritual should be the point, right? I mean, it's no wonder that people are have been so much moving towards secularism when in the West, religion has become so empty of meaning. Now, maybe it's a bit different in America, but even in America, that's been happening, despite the evangelical renewal that happened in like the 80s and 90s. So, yeah, the old classic truths from Jerusalem, the Judeo-Christian myth, worn down by the millennia, are no longer satisfactory. What did I say? Right. But that wasn't me. That was me reading from the book. So the symbolic interpretation that Jung gives for the dead is that they generally represent something in us that has not been redeemed and returns in search of a way forward, an answer or redemption. The dead are contents from the psychological shadow that come back in order to be integrated into the conscious. I mean, and this, as many people reincarnate in this period of time, as we're moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, which is a transition and an overlap, in my opinion, what we see is that many people are having to deal with not just karma from their one life, but many lifetimes in the past. And there's a release and healing of all that negativity from not just this life, many lifetimes in the past. And so it's really intense. I mean, to be honest, it's been going on for a while. It's not just this life that people have been trying to let go of all the stuff that's built up. But yeah, it's really intense. And a lot of the stuff in the shadow, a lot of the trauma, a lot of the blockages and chakras and the imbalances, it's all being healed and purged in a sense. But when it all comes to the surface, it's a lot to deal with. And when a lot of people are having a lot of that emotion and energy come to the surface, well, it's kind of chaotic. These are abandoned parts of the psyche that have been forgotten and that lie dormant in the past, typical of unwanted or repressed content. I mean, yeah, that aligns exactly with what I was saying as well. Jung, 1963, page 278. Another approach has historical premise. Liber Novus was written at the time of the First World War, the great European crisis in which hundreds of thousands of young men were sent to their deaths on the battlefield. The unimaginable number of dead across the whole of Europe invaded the collective imagination. The cruelty of death and the destiny of the dead were issues that were present in the minds of everybody, including Jung. The dead in the life and work of Jung. All these approaches are convincing to a certain extent. However, are they sufficiently comprehensive? We cannot forget that the dead were of particular interest to Jung from a very early age, according to what he wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. One of Jung's first memories was from when he was around 4 years old, when he was at home and heard a commotion. A body had been found in the Rhine. The body was placed at the back of the house in the laundry. Jung was taken over by an irresistible curiosity, often found in children, and snuck through a window at the back of the house to get a secret glimpse of the body. The trickle of blood on the floor filled him with curiosity. Page 22. It seems that death was an important issue for Jung long before he wrote Liber Novus, meaning that the dead were part of his personal myth and his individuation process. Personal myths. The personal myth is something in Jungian psychology I don't really know about. I've seen it mentioned in on the YouTube channel Jung to Live By, but I don't really follow them that regularly. So I don't know what exactly that is yet. It is known that Jung's family on his mother's side have had a close relationship with spiritual manifestations. Samuel Preiswerk, Jung's maternal grandfather, had visions of the dead that interfered in the preparation of his sermons as a pastor. Jung's cousin on his mother's side held seances, which he studied for his doctorate thesis in medicine. The various spirits that manifested themselves through Helene Preiswerk were demonstrated by Jung as psychological fragments, a clear demonstration of the capacity of the psyche to spontaneously disassociate. Or perhaps it was channeling, like the deceased, like actually in real life. But that's, I see where the author is coming from with this, and Jung. Jung's research into these phenomena was rigorously empirical, and he used his findings in his doctorate thesis while he was studying at the University of Basel. His concepts of the dissociability of the psyche and the autonomy of psychic fragments were developed in these studies and became fundamental in the later formulation of his complex theory. These so-called spirits of the dead were seen here as psychic autonomous complexes, fragments of the psyche that had not been integrated into the conscious. There is also the idea that these psychological fragments can be personified. But partial souls or complexes appeared in these sections autonomously, personified and totally independent of the ego's control. Well, this certainly reminds me of the idea of parts work, but fragments that the YouTuber Till Swan talks about. I'll look that up, by the way. That parts work video she did is very good, and it's probably helpful for anyone who listens to it, really. This sort of psychologically healing, I suppose. One of the numerous spirits that manifested in these sessions called itself Ivens, and seemed to be an older lady who would offer her advice to people. Jung interpreted the spirit as being a more mature or more developed part of the personality that has not been integrated into the conscious, 1902. I mean, I think he was interpreting everything in a very, in a somewhat materialistic way, and missing that is actually spirits being channeled. But he was very tied to the scientific method, despite how he diverged from the consensus at the time in valuable ways. But in a way, it's a good thing. It's just like people wouldn't have taken him so seriously at the time if he had diverged in certain ways. It's just like what Jung did was valuable in its own way. This is essentially a summary of the notions of the self and of individuation developed by Jung later in his creative work. The self appears here as a potential in the unconscious to be integrated by the conscious mind. Therefore, in his doctorate thesis, Jung's interest in the relationship between the dead and the living is a sort of starting point for the elaboration of the fundamental concepts of his psychology. Jung was disappointed when it was later discovered that his cousin seemed to have lied about the presence of spirits, but he always maintained a key interest in the issues relating to life after death. From India to the planet Mars, Shamdasani discussed Jung's relationship with the issue of life after death at the conference held by the Jungian Psychoanalytical Association in New York, Shamdasani 2007. Shamdasani had detected Jung's interest in this theme since his days as a university student in the Zofingia Club. Still young at the time, he had already referred to the survival of the soul after death using a Kantian reflection. As time and space are both mental categories of perception. Now, I would say it's not a coincidence that the fourth dimension is a mental dimension and involves time. But I'll go back to it. As time and space are both mental categories of perception that are constructed in order to better understand the world, the soul is not subject to these and is able to live on after death. Well, yeah. After researching the case of his cousin, Jung maintained a key interest in the supernatural phenomena. Jung started his systematic research into 5 mediums from a psychological point of view. In fact, at the beginning of the 20th century, research by psychologists and psychiatrists into mediums was very common. Many pioneers had carried out psychological investigations into mediums in an attempt to establish significant causal links between the unconscious and the conscious, including Theodore Flournoy, Freud, Ferenczi, Bleuler, William James, Pierre Janet, and Jung himself. So this is me having the opportunity to mispronounce things. Flournoy was the most important investigator of the mediums. His work with the medium Catherine Muller, who became famous under the name Helen Smith, was received with enthusiasm when it was published in 1900, entitled From India to the Planet Mars, a case study of somnambulism with glossolalia. This title was chosen as Helene claimed to be the reincarnation of various spirits, including an Indian princess from the 15th century, an inhabitant of the planet Mars, whose writing in an unknown alphabet, similar to that of an undiscovered ancient civilization, Helene was able to reproduce. That's really interesting to me because Mars used to be inhabited and used to be, well, I heard it was nuclear war that was the reason why it's uninhabitable now, but there is life apparently there under the ground. And by that I mean advanced alien civilizations that survive underground using their technology. So her paintings include beautiful, unfamiliar scenes that she claimed were Martian landscapes that she had seen in one of her visions. So I'm going to note down her name because I want to look that up. I'm really curious to see what that looks like. So give me a sec. That's 2 names, isn't it? Helen Smith. And she's also known as Catherine Muller. Right. I'm just curious what those paintings look like. I want to see what Mars looked like. previously, before. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by that idea. Flournoy carried out systematic studies on Helen Smith's psychic manifestations over 5 years. Through detailed study of these, he demonstrated that they were products of subliminal psychic activity, which is far from the literal approach to spiritual phenomena. I mean, I imagine subliminal psychological activity would be involved in channeling. I mean, it's an intuitive process, right? Flournoy was one of the most important precursors of analytical psychology, and his, as well as Janet's influence on Jung's thinking, has not yet been given significant importance. Flournoy's book is frequently cited by Jung in Symbols of Transformation, and his theory of subliminal psychic activity can be considered an important precursor to the theory of the collective unconscious. So Flournoy, I'll look that up too. If you're interested, it's Flower, like Flournoy. So yeah, he's something interesting to look up, perhaps. On life after death, Jung includes various thoughts about the meaning of death at the end of Memories, Dreams, Reflections. He writes that he could not theorize on the existence of life after death or the survival of the dead, as he was dealing with a limiting concept. On this subject, he could only mythologize or tell stories, page 278. However, the existence of dreams with characters that have died tells us to a certain extent life does continue after death. He then develops his theory of probable life after death based on the fact that it has been empirically demonstrated that at least a certain part of the psyche escapes the laws of space-time causality, a Kantian return to the ideas he presented at the Zofingia Club. The various synchronistic phenomena studied by Jung are situated in this sphere. Based on his experiences during the years he was writing Liber Novus, he seeks to demonstrate the continuity of the consciousness after conscious life. In one of his various tales of experiences with people who had already died, Jung mentions in Memories, Dreams, Reflections a strange fantasy that he had involving a neighbor who had died the previous day. Having some difficulty sleeping while he was thinking about the painful loss of his friend, Jung tells how he started to feel unwell, as though there was a very real presence in his room. At first he tried to push away the thought, but then he tried to confront the experience without judging whether it was real or not. That's a good idea. He let his mind flow in the direction it chose and observed the strange presence of his deceased friend. In this fantasy, he followed his friend who headed towards his own house just a few hundred meters away. He went inside and entered the library, walking over to the bookcase. On the top shelf, there was a collection of red books by Emily Zola. The dead friend pointed towards the second volume in a series of 5. The following day, this strange experience drove Jung to seek his neighbor's window and ask permission to visit his library. He saw that on the top shelf there really was a collection of red books by Zola. The title of the second book was The Legacy of the Dead, pages 289 to 290. Okay, so yeah, so that's astral projection, I think. Jung had no idea. I think he was a shaman, to be honest. He doesn't have no idea he was a shaman. It is as though the meaningful experience expressed to Jung that the dead have something to say to the living and leave them some form of spiritual legacy, tradition, or genetic heritage to preserve. Perhaps it is this profound truth that led the ancient Greeks to revere their deified ancestors as mana personalities and transform them into mythological hero figures. These ancestors were responsible for safeguarding old values and transmitting them to new generations. Ancestors provide the emotional experience of a man's basic roots and reinforce a sense of identity. The ancestral spirits that return also bring vital lifeblood and tradition to their people. Heraclitus of Ephesus, Bornheim 2002, said, "It is our delight or death for souls to become wet. We live their death, and they are our death." Fragment 77. We guard the legacy of our ancestors, their tradition, and the seeds that they plant through the generations. We are the guardians and the transformers of those ancestral seeds. This is the legacy that the dead leave us. Past actions, intentions, and desires are all the mental architecture guarded by the family ancestral myth. This legacy is more visible in analytic work related to parents' childhood memories, secrets, vocations, and parental fantasies, which invisibly mold and pervade the personality through the unconscious. Analysis of our family tree puts us in close contact with the deeper mindsets that span the ages and mold the destinies of entire generations of families. Jung's approach to the relationship between the dead and living in memories, dreams, reflections is surprising. He values the knowledge of the living in relation to the dead and emphasizes life and temporal experience as space per se that can be used for learning and personal growth. Due to their existence within time and space, the living have a potential for personal development and learning that the dead do not, as they exist within a temporal space. Jung derived atemporal space. These conclusions in the Red Book from his encounter with his atemporal inner characters, the old prophet Elijah and the young blind Salome. Jung passes a long time without having any contact with these characters, and when he encountered them again, he had the strange sensation that they were changed very little or not at all. The conclusion he reached was that they remained in the archetypal atemporal realm, removed from historical time associated with the living or conscious life. This meant they had no possibility to learn or transform, which is perhaps why we live and incarnate. The way time works in incarnation, it allows a different way of learning that is faster. So yeah. I mean, I see this all within the context of reincarnation and soul groups, whether or not the authors see it that way or not. Whether Jung or Walter Burchett or Shemlazani see it that way. I mean, Elijah and Salome could well just be in the afterlife, the spiritual realm, and basically he was accessing them from there. And that's why they didn't change, because they're outside of time looking in. Like, they didn't really move around space, but they could see at different points in time. Only Jung, as a living conscious being, can help to remove them from their state of inertia. So perhaps they grow from their interactions with us. And of course, there is this principle of spirituality of the teacher and the student. The teacher learns from teaching. It's not just that the student learns. It's a two-way process. The characters in Liber Novus learn, develop, and begin to understand themselves through their contact with Jung from the temporal realm, the afterlife. in my opinion. Page 284. This understanding of the important role of the living in relation to the dead originates from one of Jung's crucial dreams, which he also describes in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Great dreams have a fundamental role at certain key moments in Jung's life. This is one of those, and it took place during a bike ride in the city of Ascona in the north of Italy. Jung was traveling with a friend, and they found a place to stay on the banks of Lake Maggiore. They planned to continue their trip through some neighboring cities before catching the train to Zurich. It was at this time that Jung had a fundamental dream. I was in an assemblage of distinguished spirits of earlier centuries. The feeling was similar to one I had later towards the illustrious ancestors in the Black Rock Temple of my 1944 vision. The conversation was conducted in Latin. A gentleman with a long curly wig addressed me and asked me a difficult question, the gist of which I could no longer recall after I woke up. I understood him, but did not have sufficient command of the language to answer him in Latin. I felt so profoundly humiliated by this that the emotion awakened me. Page 284. Okay. Jung comments that after waking up from this dream, he started to reflect on the book he was preparing to write, Metamorphoses and Symbols of the Libido, and then the title of Symbols of Transformation. He had feelings of inferiority in relation to the question that he did not know how to answer. He decided not to continue on his trip and return immediately to Zurich to continue the book he was running behind on. It was only much later that he realized that the old man with the curly wig was an ancestral spirit. The ancestral spirits had been interrogating Jung in order to learn what they had not been able to learn during their own life. It was Jung's task to provide them with the answers, as only he, who lived in the three-dimensional space and had a notion of time, could clearly and objectively acquire new knowledge. His role was therefore to teach those living in the atemporal archetypal realm. I didn't know that they couldn't learn new things. They can only deal with what they have learned in their lifetimes, but they can't learn new things. Not in the same sense. They can't acquire new knowledge, or only to a limited degree. That's interesting. That's very interesting. This positive vision of the conscious in relation to the unconscious leads Jung to lend excessive value to man in this existential drama. The relationship between man and God is affected by this perspective and was probably the result of his experiences recorded in the Red Book, and this and other important dreams. God needs man in the same way that man needs God. Man needs God in order to become conscious, and God becomes conscious through man. See also Jung, 1952, pages 455 to 458. Now, I mean, if you understand pantheism and the idea of the law of one and the idea that, well, source grows, learns more through experiencing through us, because each soul is source in a sense. Source is an amalgamation of all of that. This is of particular importance to man as a conscious being with free will. God in his universalities needs man with his reflective conscious in order to become conscious of himself. This is a rather heterodox idea that was far removed from traditional Christian view, and similar to some of the Gnostic formulations that were marginalized by the orthodoxy. Jung later sought support for the perception of the importance of man before God in the medieval mystics, 1948, quoting Angelus Silesius, "He cannot live without me, nor I with him." I'm going to write that guy's name out and look him up. Angelus. Angelus Silesius. Okay. And all right. Bringing together the ideas cited above, the hordes of the dead in Liber Novus are part of a constant concern that Jung had carried with him since childhood, relating to death, transcendence, and the survival of the soul. In Liber Novus, Jung seeks to take on the theme of the dead by giving it a symbolic as well as a concrete meaning. This is the fundamental. This is as the dead start to represent the unlived life and the parts of ourselves that long for conscious expression. You know, maybe this is true. Maybe they are beings outside of incarnation, but maybe there's a link to our own unconscious in them, even though they're outside of time. Maybe part of them manifests through in us, and we access that. Maybe. I don't know. In this way, Jung in his final years gave a final definition of the dead, those that seek to learn from the living. In this way, he radically inverted the higher knowledge and understanding that is traditionally expected of the dead, according to religion and the spiritualist traditions. In addition, although the dead are the guardians of the past and of what is transmitted to us through the generations, they provide with us an incomplete understanding. And it is our task to continuously learn and develop both our culture and the generations to come. So that's the end of the chapter 7. I will add, though, that there are definitely lots of stories and cases where, you know, there have been, like, for example, spiritual masters or whatever, right? And that through a medium that there's been contact with their soul or their being, right? And they've come and they've communicated with people, and people have learned from that. But also situations, as I mentioned here, where spirits are actually learning from us. And it would be a two-way process, wouldn't it? Why would it be just one way? There's differences between being in incarnation and out of it, and just things to learn both ways. And also depends on the soul and souls in question. So I think this is a short chapter, but it was really interesting, especially given the section of about the afterlife in the David Wilcock book I read, which I really should read more of. Man, there's so much to read. You see, this is why I say I should watch less videos and read more. That could apply to you as well, I guess. Yeah. I could start on chapter 8. I don't really have time to finish chapter 8. Oh, interesting stuff here. Very interesting. Do I start it and then carry on, do another episode midway through it? I don't know. I think I can actually start it. Yeah, it should be fine. So I've got something in like 40 minutes that I need to do, but I've got 40 minutes or half an hour or something to go, I guess, before I need to sort of prepare for the next thing. But yeah, I've got time to start chapter 8 because it's in sections, so I can just stop at one at the end of one of the sections. And okay, I'll get on with it. Chapter 8, the search for the center. In 1918, Jung was commanding the English section of the hospitalized war wounded at the Chateau de X. I don't know, it's a weird symbol that looks like a combination of a C and an E. Yeah, reading French is not my thing, in French Switzerland. During this period, he systematically drew a range of circular figures he called mandalas, a Sanskrit word meaning magic circles. That reminds me of like magic circles are a well-known thing in, I suppose, the occult, but also about the occult, but also like portrayals of magic in like fantasy, and particularly anime. But yeah. The psychology of the mandala went on to become one of the main theories of analytical psychology. Jung narrates in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that at first he started to spontaneously draw symmetrical concentric circles, and that he noticed that drawing these shapes was a way of objectifying mental content with a high emotional intensity. This way, he was able to confront and gain a better understanding of the material while keeping himself separate from it. Basing these circular shapes, Jung was performing the process of active imagination. See more on the development of this technique in chapter 6. He would later define the mandala as an important symbol of the self. The self as the center and totality of the psyche could manifest itself in dreams and fantasies in the form of the mandala, expressing the organizing and structuring nature of totality. There's a sort of holism that you can see in a mandala that's fascinating. The mandala mandalas in different cultures. The mandala in its circular and symmetrical form seems to have a calming effect on emotional anxiety. Its spherical shape is an aesthetic representation of the idea of completeness, integrated totality, the idea of the existence of a center, which, although not clearly marked, is at least inferred. So I guess maybe it allows people to feel centered, to feel complete, to feel integrated with the totality. And since the totality is God, maybe it's comforting for that reason. Mandalas communicate the idea of the harmonious centralization of totality. They are normally circular or rectangular in shape, can contain a range of religious representations, and are used across a wide range of cultures for religious or therapeutic purposes. The most widely known mandalas are those of the Oriental religions such as Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism. See illustration 2, which I will show you. I also suggest you could try experimenting with doing mandalas yourself. Why not? I would suggest don't think it through too much and just sort of intuit it. Just do what comes naturally. I mean, a lot of these things I talk about, like, you can experiment to some extent. Why not? In this context, they have an essentially calming function and can trigger deep states of meditation. Meditation in these religions uses two basic strategies to help deepen the mind: mantras and yantras. The former are magical sounds that produce specific mental states, and the latter are representations or ritual figurations that help the mind to focus and open, enabling creative introspection. Illustration 2, Tibetan Yantra. Image 1, from Concerning Mandala Symbolism, Jung, 1950. And I will show this to you if you're watching the video. Oh, you see what I'm showing you, sorry. There it is. Okay. Oriental monks use the yantra mandala in their meditations. The mandalas used in Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism are intricately decorated and represent the entire cosmos. The illustrations involve bodhisattvas and demons and a huge variety of mental states and worlds. Although mandalas are extremely complex, they maintain their circular shape and always direct inwards towards the center. The monk successfully stares at the mandala and tries to mentally repeat its complex symmetrical structure with his eyes closed. So I just tried it out with that picture. The process is repeated various times, and a calm mental state is reached when the mandala is completely visualized in the mind. All right, do you want to try it out? So you could go back to where I held it up actually, or I'll hold it up again. Okay. There it is. Look at that. Right. Now pause it where you have it on there. Now close your eyes. Oh, I'm being cool. Give me a sec. Close your eyes and try to picture it and repeat the process. Hello. Give me a sec, okay? All right. Seems like something's come up, so bye for now.